When Ghost Company deployed between March and April of 2021, our unit moved out in 2 separate waves. Most of us landed in Jordan first, where we were assigned as an alternate crisis response company. Looking back, I knew we had a challenge ahead of us. Our preparation cycle had been shortened because the coronavirus disease-19 pandemic disrupted almost everything. Training events were canceled, facilities shut down, and leadership turnover became constant as Marines rotated out of key positions throughout the company. That time in Jordan became critical. Every day of training mattered because we had to make up for everything we had missed before deployment. We pushed hard to build the level of readiness that I believed we would eventually need once we entered Afghanistan. As early as February, rumors started making their way through the chain of command. We began hearing that we might be sent to reinforce the United States Embassy in Kabul. That mission eventually went to the United States Army instead, but the possibility made it clear that something significant was developing. As the summer progressed, our battalion, our regimental-level leadership, the Special Purpose Marine Air Ground Task Force Crisis, Response Central Command, and Task Force 5. 1-5 all shifted their attention toward preparing for a possible non-combatant evacuation operation in Afghanistan. Nobody from my company participated directly in the reconnaissance trips to Hamid Karzai International Airport. We also were not involved in the detailed rehearsals or operational planning. Those responsibilities belonged to higher headquarters. Still, they made sure we stayed informed. We received regular updates about the situation, and we understood that plans were constantly changing. Our mission during that period was simple: stay prepared, stay flexible, be ready to execute whatever mission came down, regardless of how quickly conditions changed. By the beginning of August, it was obvious Afghanistan was deteriorating at an alarming pace. Even then, we still had not received confirmation that we would deploy there. We remained on a 96-hour deployment posture, prepared to move with very little notice. Around August 9th, another update came through telling us we were still not going. Then, everything changed, almost overnight. On August 12th, the military officially initiated a non-combatant evacuation operation, and we received orders that Ghost Company would deploy. At that moment, I was training with several of my Marines near Amman in northern Jordan. I immediately sent a message to another company commander and asked if I needed to get back to base and report to the classified communications network. His answer was immediate. Yes, get back. That was all I needed to hear. Once we returned, we began executing our 96-hour deployment plan. We packed equipment, finalized preparations, and staged for movement into Kuwait. The sequence was straightforward. Leave Jordan, stage in Kuwait, prepare to insert into Afghanistan. Because of transportation delays, we did not arrive in Kabul until the early hours of August 19th, although we had originally planned to arrive the evening before. While we were in Kuwait, I finally received my first detailed operational briefing. Parts of our battalion headquarters had already entered Afghanistan, so they were able to provide current information from the ground. The report was sobering. Conditions at the airport were already spiraling out of control. Crowds had overwhelmed portions of the airfield at least once, possibly twice. Coalition forces were still fighting to establish a secure perimeter, while thousands of desperate civilians flooded every available access point. The initial plan called for our company to secure part of the southern runway area and establish a defensive line separating coalition forces from Taliban-controlled territory. I remember watching live television coverage before boarding our aircraft and thinking there was almost no chance that plan would survive until we landed. Events were unfolding so quickly that I expected several revisions before our boots ever touched the ground. I was right. When our aircraft landed around 1 o'clock in the morning on August 19th, everything had already changed. As we stepped off the airplane, none of us knew exactly what waited outside. I honestly wondered whether we would walk directly into an uncontrollable mob. Fortunately, the airport itself had been secured by then. That did not mean it was calm. Gunfire echoed from different directions across the airfield. Tracer rounds cut through the night sky. Aircraft arrived and departed one after another. Military personnel from countries all over the world, most of them members of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, operated alongside one another while frightened civilians crowded every available space, hoping to escape Afghanistan. The entire environment felt tense, loud, and unpredictable. We established a temporary position inside one of the airport gymnasiums, received another operational update, and then learned our assignment. Before sunrise, Ghost Company would move to Abbey Gate. Our mission was clear. We would establish an entry control point, secure the gate, maintain control of access, and keep the evacuation process moving for everyone attempting to enter through one of the airport's primary access points. Before committing the company, I moved forward with my executive officer, my company gunnery sergeant, who served as my senior tactical advisor, and my senior corpsman to evaluate the situation firsthand. I climbed onto the roof of a vehicle to get a better view over the gate. The sight below stopped me cold. It looked like the end of the world. Thousands upon thousands of people pressed against the closed gate with nowhere else to go. Every face carried the same expression of desperation. Only a handful of people could enter at a time, and only if they reached the front with the proper travel documents or passports. Outside our perimeter stood the Barron Hotel, where British forces had established their evacuation coordination center. The problem was obvious. The hotel had become isolated from the airport by an enormous mass of civilians packed tightly between the two positions. British troops worked to move evacuees forward whenever possible, usually inside vehicles, but progress was painfully slow. One unexpected advantage immediately became clear. The British company controlling that sector happened to be the same unit that had trained alongside us in Jordan only weeks earlier. When I recognized their company commander, I walked over and greeted him. "It is good to see you again." That previous training built instant trust between our units, and under the circumstances, that trust would prove invaluable. Not long after we arrived, the situation deteriorated faster than anyone expected. The security force already positioned at Abbey Gate suddenly lost control of the entrance. A massive surge of civilians pushed toward the gate, and the pressure became overwhelming. At almost the same moment, my first platoon arrived. The first thing those Marines saw was me shouting orders. "Get on line! Close the gap!" They had no clear picture of what waited beyond that gate. They did not know exactly what they were walking into. All they knew was that their company needed them. Without hesitation, their platoon commander, squad leaders, and Marines moved forward together. They locked shoulders, established a line, and drove straight into the crowd. Working alongside Marines from Fox Company and British paratroopers, we fought to regain control of the entrance. For roughly 30 to 45 minutes, every man on that line gave everything he had. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced. The hardest part was understanding exactly who stood in front of us. These were not enemy fighters. Many of them were people who had worked beside American and coalition forces for 2 decades. They had translated for us. They had fought alongside us. They had supported our mission. They were our partners, our friends, and our allies. Now, because thousands of desperate people were trapped in one place with nowhere to go, the situation became violent despite everyone's intentions. At one point, my rifle sling tightened around my neck as the crowd crushed forward. Several of my Marines experienced the same thing. There were moments when I honestly wondered whether we were going to survive. I watched Marines disappear beneath the pressure of the crowd after being knocked off their feet. Then I watched other Marines force their way through the sea of people, grab their buddies, and drag them back into formation without a second thought. Those young lance corporals displayed courage that I will never forget. Nobody hesitated. Nobody abandoned anyone. They simply fought for each other. Eventually, after nearly 45 exhausting minutes, we managed to relieve enough pressure to regain control. The crowd slowly backed away. We stabilized the gate and restored order. Fox Company established a forward security line inside the crowd, while several hundred civilians remained between their position and the entrance. From there, we began screening everyone individually. Every person had to be searched and identified. Sometimes we allowed people inside even when their paperwork was incomplete. We knew many would eventually have to leave again, but creating space outside the gate became absolutely necessary to prevent another collapse of the perimeter. As evening approached, I stood beside the British company commander studying the situation. We both came to the same conclusion. The Baron Hotel had to be connected to the airport. Without opening that route, British evacuees remained isolated outside the security perimeter. Neither of us wanted to move through that crowd after sunset. Earlier that day had already shown us how dangerous it could become. Operating in darkness, potentially wearing gas masks and night vision equipment, would only make the situation worse. Initially, we believed waiting until daylight was the safer choice. Then my radio crackled. The order came directly from higher headquarters. "You will clear the route to the Baron Hotel immediately." I answered back that conditions were not favorable. Almost immediately, the response came. Negative. Execute now. For a brief moment, I considered pushing back again. Then I stopped myself. If I expected my Marines to trust my decisions without always explaining every reason behind them, then I owed the same trust to my commanders. I accepted the order. We immediately gathered leaders from Ghost Company, Fox Company, British forces, and one of our interpreters. Together, we developed a different approach. Earlier that day, we had relied almost entirely on physical force to regain control. This time, we decided communication would become our primary weapon. Many people in the crowd understood English. Our interpreter suggested something simple. Instead of immediately pushing forward, explain exactly what we needed them to do. Give them time to spread the message themselves. Allow the information to move naturally through the crowd. It was a smart plan. I looked at the interpreter and told him to explain everything. He smiled and answered, "Sir, I will, right after you speak to them." So I climbed onto a concrete jersey barrier where everyone could see me. I introduced myself. Then I spoke directly to the people standing closest to us. I told them we were there to help. I explained that opening the route to the Baron Hotel would allow more families to escape. But I also told them we needed their help first. They had to move back. That moment required tremendous trust from everyone standing at the front. Many of those people had spent hours. Some had spent days, fighting their way to that exact position. Now I was asking them to surrender it voluntarily. Slowly, the message spread. People began talking among themselves. Word moved farther and farther through the crowd. Little by little, thousands of civilians stepped backward. We eventually pushed the line nearly 400 meters until we reached the closest Taliban checkpoint. That became our new boundary. Then something remarkable happened. The very same platoon that had nearly been crushed earlier in the day slung their rifles across their backs, stepped forward without raising their weapons, and began advancing one careful step at a time. Every few feet they repeated the same respectful request. "Sir, please move back." "Ma'am, please move back." Again and again, hour after hour. Even after everything they had endured, they treated every civilian with patience and dignity. Watching those young Marines display that level of restraint after what they had experienced remains one of the most impressive things I have ever witnessed. For nearly 8 straight hours, we continued easing the crowd backward. By sunrise, we had successfully opened a secure corridor connecting Abbey Gate with the Baron Hotel. At last, evacuation operations could begin moving efficiently. Once the entry control point was fully established, the mission shifted into a relentless routine. The excitement of the initial operation faded. What remained was exhausting work. The first few days passed on pure adrenaline. Everything happened so quickly that fatigue barely registered. Eventually, that changed. The pace settled into long hours of standing in blistering heat without meaningful rest. Simply holding our positions became physically draining. We did not have enough Marines to establish a proper rotation schedule. Every available Marine had to remain on post. Some stayed awake for several consecutive days with almost no sleep. Meanwhile, another crisis developed behind our lines. Thousands of civilians still waited outside the gate. Inside the perimeter, Hundreds quickly became thousands as more evacuees entered. We simply did not have enough food. We did not have enough water. We had only a single portable toilet serving thousands of desperate people. The humanitarian crisis became almost as difficult as the security mission. Some of the hardest orders I ever gave involved withholding supplies. I watched children collapse from heat exhaustion while my Marines stood only a few feet away. Every instinct told us to help. Sometimes operational reality made that impossible. Those orders did not fall on senior officers. They fell on 19- and 20-year-old lance corporals standing face to face with exhausted families. I have never stopped admiring how professionally they carried that burden. Despite everything, they remained respectful. They still addressed people as sir and ma'am. They continued treating every family with compassion while doing everything possible to save as many lives as they could. Even under those brutal conditions, my Marines never lost sight of why we were there. No matter how tired they became, they continued treating people with respect. They spoke calmly, showed patience, and never forgot that every person standing in front of them was desperate for a chance to survive. I watched them comfort frightened families while carrying the weight of impossible decisions on their shoulders. Their professionalism never wavered. Our corpsmen were nothing short of extraordinary. One corpsman in particular stood out every single day, Hospital Corpsman Max Soviak. Max came from a large family. He had 6 biological brothers and sisters, along with more than a dozen foster siblings. His parents had opened their home to children with severe developmental disabilities and terminal illnesses. Taking care of vulnerable kids was not something Max learned in the military. He had been doing it his entire life. As children became separated from their parents during the evacuation, Max took the initiative. He organized a place where lost children could be cared for until their families could be located. He made sure every child received attention, reassurance, and whatever comfort we could provide under the circumstances. Whenever he had the opportunity, he made those kids laugh. When children needed to be transferred to the Swedish-run orphan facility near the passenger terminal, Max carried some of them himself. Sometimes that meant walking for miles through the airport while holding exhausted children in his arms. I would walk through our area and see Marines quietly performing acts of compassion that most people will never know about. Nobody asked for recognition. Nobody complained. They simply did the job. There were moments when I tried to congratulate one of my Marines for what he had done, only to realize I could barely get the words out. Good job, Marine. Sometimes my voice caught in my throat because I fully understood the emotional burden these young men were carrying. The remarkable part was that they never acted as though they were doing anything extraordinary. To them, it was simply the mission. Very early in the operation, intelligence reports began warning us about terrorist threats. Honestly, we did not need anyone to tell us danger surrounded us. We already knew that. The Islamic State group maintained a significant presence in Afghanistan, and we fully expected they would attempt to attack coalition forces during the evacuation. At the same time, our relationship with the Taliban remained fragile. They controlled the areas surrounding the airport, and their message was unmistakable. If coalition forces remained after August 31st, the agreement ended. Everyone understood exactly what that meant. Meanwhile, intelligence reports specifically mentioning Abbey Gate and the Baron Hotel started arriving almost immediately after we secured the area. Those reports demanded our full attention. The geography of our position created serious vulnerabilities. One flank followed a drainage canal that proved invaluable for identifying and processing evacuees. That same canal also provided an ideal approach for anyone attempting to launch a suicide attack. It became both our greatest operational advantage and our greatest weakness. As threat reports became more specific, we adjusted everything we could. We repositioned medical personnel. We redistributed Marines. We moved leaders into locations where they could respond more quickly if something happened. Still, there was only so much we could accomplish. No defensive adjustment could eliminate the fundamental problem. Our mission required us to remain close to the crowd. There was simply no way around it. Some intelligence warnings became incredibly specific. At times, we received reports claiming an attack might occur within minutes. Whenever that happened, we cleared portions of the canal if possible and tightened our defensive posture. But we could never completely abandon our positions. If we pulled everyone back, the crowd would immediately overwhelm the gate. Every Marine understood exactly what was at stake. Nobody hid the danger from them. They knew terrorists were actively trying to kill them. They understood how exposed their positions were. Even so, they continued stepping into those positions every single day because they believed saving innocent lives mattered more than their own safety. To this day, I consider that the greatest display of courage I have ever witnessed. Then, August 26th arrived. Everything we did that day revolved around one final objective. The British evacuation effort was nearing completion. Once their personnel and evacuees left the barren hotel, they would withdraw through our lines. Ghost Company would then collapse our position. Taliban fighters would assume control outside the gate, and the 82nd Airborne Division would secure the final withdrawal of Marine forces before departing Afghanistan at the end of the month. According to the timeline, we planned to stop accepting new evacuees around 6 o'clock that evening. That would leave enough time to process everyone already inside our perimeter before beginning our withdrawal. The atmosphere that day felt different. The intelligence reports were becoming increasingly alarming. Every indication suggested the threat level had risen dramatically. Complicating matters even further, Abbey Gate had become the only entrance still operating. Every other access point had closed. As word spread through Kabul, thousands more people rushed toward our position. Families understood that this might be their last opportunity to escape. When people believe the next few minutes determine whether they live or die, they will do almost anything to move forward. The pressure continued building throughout the afternoon. My Marines working along the canal endured the worst of it. The work demanded constant physical effort, so we rotated platoons whenever possible. Around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, 1st Platoon returned to the line. These were the same Marines who had led the operation to reopen the route to the barren hotel days earlier. Once again, they accepted the toughest assignment without complaint. They continued searching the crowd for anyone carrying valid travel documents, pulling families forward whenever they could. Then, at approximately 5:36 in the evening, everything changed. A suicide bomber from the Islamic State stepped to the opposite side of the canal, roughly 10 meters from our Marines. He detonated his explosive vest. The blast was catastrophic. Nearly 200 Afghan civilians lost their lives. 13 United States service members were killed. 9 of them belonged to my company. Others suffered devastating injuries because everyone had been forced into such close proximity while carrying out the mission. For just a brief instant after the explosion, complete chaos erupted. Then something remarkable happened. Training took over. Every casualty evacuation drill, every combat lifesaver class, every medical exercise, every rehearsal, it all came together exactly when we needed it most. My corpsmen immediately began triaging casualties. Marines established evacuation routes almost instinctively. Leaders at every level stepped forward without waiting for orders. Within roughly 15 minutes, dozens of wounded personnel had already been evacuated from the blast site. The trauma facility sat about a 17-minute drive away. Our first casualty reached that hospital only minutes after the explosion. One of my machine gunners had suffered a devastating neck wound. Despite those injuries, he survived because of the speed and professionalism displayed by everyone involved in his evacuation. Today, he continues serving our country while training to become a Special Forces medic in the United States Army. Many other Marines survived because of the extraordinary skill demonstrated by our corpsmen, the trauma surgeons, the nurses, the shock trauma platoon, and every medical team involved from Kabul all the way to Germany. Their work saved countless lives. One Marine's actions during those moments will remain with me forever. Corporal Tyler Wilson had been struck by shrapnel from his ankle all the way to his neck. His lungs had been torn apart. He was bleeding heavily. When he regained consciousness, he realized he was lying on top of a Marine from another unit whom he had never even met. Ignoring his own injuries, he grabbed her and began dragging her toward an opening in the fence where other Marines could reach them. When additional Marines arrived and tried to help him instead, he pushed them away. "No," he told them. "Take her." Only after ensuring she was safe did he continue crawling toward the casualty collection point under his own power. He eventually collapsed there. Doctors later reported that he lost a detectable pulse numerous times before finally reaching Germany for advanced treatment. His courage that day reflected everything our Corps stands for. I had the privilege of serving beside men like him. I know many others would have made exactly the same decision under those circumstances. That is the kind of Marines Ghost Company produced. When the explosion happened, I was positioned near the canal, roughly 20 meters from where the suicide bomber detonated his explosive vest. At the time, I had no idea how much the blast wave had affected me. It took weeks before I fully understood the extent of the concussion. I never actually heard the explosion. The first thing I saw was a brilliant flash. A moment later, I heard a dull popping sound. I eventually realized it was not the blast itself. It was a tear gas canister mounted on one of our Marines' protective gear that had ruptured during the explosion. Within seconds, tear gas began spreading through our position, making an already devastating situation even more difficult. For several moments, everything around me felt unreal. People were screaming. Civilians were running in every direction. Visibility was poor, and it became increasingly difficult to focus. My first instinct was to make sure our Marines secured the area. "Establish security." That was the first command I remember giving. I tried to assess what was happening across the canal, but my vision would not cooperate. The combined effects of the blast and the tear gas left me disoriented. I struggled to stay focused and found myself moving almost entirely on instinct. One of my platoon commanders spotted me. Without hesitation, he reached me, grabbed my gear, and pulled me toward the casualty collection point. Another senior enlisted Marine quickly checked me for injuries. After a few moments, I gathered myself, cleared my head as best I could, and returned to the fight. While I was recovering, leadership never stopped. A young lieutenant immediately assumed control of the Marines closest to the blast. Another officer helped coordinate casualty evacuation. My executive officer took charge of the casualty collection point. Our company gunnery sergeant and first sergeant stepped into their responsibilities without waiting for instructions. Watching them operate reinforced something I had always believed. The strongest units are not dependent on one individual. A truly disciplined unit continues accomplishing the mission, even when its commander is temporarily unable to lead. That is exactly what Ghost Company did. Nobody stood around waiting for orders. Every Marine understood his responsibility. Every leader acted. Because of their training and discipline, dozens of wounded service members were evacuated within minutes under some of the most dangerous conditions imaginable. Their speed and professionalism saved lives. Behind our position, a shock trauma team immediately received casualties after our corpsmen completed their initial triage. From there, the wounded were transported to the Roll 2 medical facility near the passenger terminal inside the airport. The doctors, nurses, surgeons, and medical personnel there performed extraordinary work. They fought for every life that reached their operating tables. Once the immediate evacuation effort was complete, we received orders to withdraw from our position. A sister company, supported by elements of the 82nd Airborne Division, assumed responsibility for the sector. Ghost Company regrouped inside the same airport gymnasium where we had established our initial staging area after arriving in Kabul. My first sergeant and I went directly to the medical facility to check on our wounded Marines. Afterward, we carried out one of the hardest responsibilities any commander can face. We identified our fallen. There are no words that truly describe that moment. Later, I assembled the company. We stood together, and I read the names of the Marines and corpsmen we had lost. The weight of that moment settled over every man in the room. Then I had to deliver another difficult message. I ordered the company to reset its equipment, clean its weapons, and prepare to return to duty. Our mission was not over. There would be time to grieve. There would be time to remember our brothers. But at that moment, we still had responsibilities to fulfill. The fight had not ended. Generations of American infantrymen and Marines before us had endured the same painful reality. They mourned their fallen, completed the mission, and honored their brothers through their actions. That legacy now belonged to us. We intended to live up to it. In the days and years that followed, attention naturally turned to the men who never came home. Their names became part of the history of the evacuation, but to the Marines who served beside them, they were much more than names. They were teammates, friends, mentors, and leaders whose influence extended far beyond the battlefield. Among them was Corporal Hunter Lopez, a Marine widely respected throughout Ghost Company. He earned a reputation as one of the unit's strongest team leaders through professionalism, discipline, and genuine concern for the Marines under his leadership. He regularly helped run marksmanship training for the company and spent his personal time mentoring younger Marines. If someone lacked a practical life skill, Hunter stepped in to teach it. Whether it meant helping a Marine learn to drive or encouraging someone who lacked confidence, he invested in the people around him without expecting recognition. Lance Corporal Kareem Nikui brought relentless energy and determination to the platoon. Although smaller in stature than many of his peers, he possessed remarkable toughness and an infectious confidence. He enjoyed competition, trained hard, and constantly pushed himself to improve. During training exercises, his leadership qualities became increasingly apparent, and those who served beside him believed he had every attribute needed to become an outstanding non-commissioned officer. Another Marine remembered for his personality was Lance Corporal Dylan Marola. He had a natural ability to lift the spirits of everyone around him. Even during demanding field exercises or long deployments, his sense of humor remained intact. Fellow Marines recalled that conversations with Dylan could immediately improve morale after difficult days, making him one of those rare individuals whose optimism positively affected an entire unit. From Wyoming came Lance Corporal Riley McCollum, an accomplished wrestler before joining the Marine Corps. Friends often spoke about his plans for life after military service. He hoped to return home, become a history teacher, and coach wrestling in his community. Those ambitions reflected the kind of man he was, someone who wanted to continue serving others long after his time in uniform. Tragically, his daughter was born only weeks after his death, a reminder of the future his family lost alongside him. Lance Corporal David Lee Espinoza earned the affection of his fellow Marines through his work ethic and positive attitude. Still early in his military career, he demonstrated steady professional growth throughout the deployment. Teammates often described him as someone who quietly matured under pressure while never losing the kindness that made him popular throughout the platoon. Lance Corporal Jared Schmitz was known as a dependable Marine who approached every assignment with quiet determination. He rarely sought attention and simply focused on completing each task to the highest standard possible. Those who served beside him remembered his consistency, humility, and unwavering commitment to duty. Corporal Dagan William Tyler Page combined exceptional physical toughness with natural leadership. Fellow Marines admired both his tactical instincts and his willingness to place himself wherever the mission demanded the greatest effort. During the evacuation, witnesses recalled him taking decisive action to help move vulnerable families to safety under extremely challenging conditions. His confidence inspired those around him, and his absence left a significant void within the company. Corporal Humberto Sanchez earned respect through quiet professionalism rather than loud words. While reserved around senior leaders, those closest to him described him as loyal, dependable, and deeply committed to his fellow Marines. His platoon remembered him as someone who balanced a dry sense of humor with an unwavering readiness to shoulder difficult responsibilities whenever they arose. Hospital Corpsman Max Soviak had already distinguished himself before the attack through his extraordinary compassion for Afghan children separated from their families. His background caring for foster children prepared him to bring calm and reassurance into situations where fear and uncertainty surrounded everyone. Fellow service members believed he possessed unlimited potential, both as a medical professional and as a future military leader. His selfless service became one of the defining stories of the evacuation. The losses extended beyond Ghost Company. Army Staff Sergeant Ryan Knaus worked tirelessly throughout the operation to help calm frightened civilians and support crowd management efforts. Those who served with him remembered his steady demeanor and positive attitude, qualities that made him an important presence during one of the most difficult missions of the evacuation. Sergeant Nicole G. became widely recognized for her compassion during the final days at Hamid Karzai International Airport. Images and stories shared after the operation reflected her dedication to caring for vulnerable families, particularly children, despite the growing danger around Abbey Gate. Alongside Sergeant Johanny Rosario Pichardo, she accepted significant personal risk while assisting civilians because they believed protecting others remained their responsibility until the very end. Each of these service members represented the values their unit sought to uphold: courage, discipline, selflessness, and commitment to others. Their actions during the evacuation demonstrated not only military professionalism, but also compassion under extraordinary circumstances. For those who served beside them, their legacy extends far beyond the events of a single day. It lives on in the Marines, sailors, soldiers, and families who continue to remember their example and strive to honor it through continued service and unwavering dedication to one another. The evacuation from Kabul remains one of the most complex military and humanitarian operations carried out in recent history. Service members from multiple nations worked around the clock under rapidly changing conditions, balancing security responsibilities with the urgent need to move thousands of civilians to safety. Every decision carried significant consequences, and leaders at every level were forced to adapt continuously as the situation evolved. For Ghost Company, the mission became a defining chapter in its history. The Marines who deployed to Afghanistan arrived prepared to carry out whatever assignment they received. What they encountered was unlike anything they had expected. They faced overwhelming crowds, extreme physical exhaustion, constant uncertainty, and a persistent threat of attack. Despite those conditions, they continued to perform their duties with discipline and professionalism. Throughout the operation, countless acts of courage went unnoticed outside the airport perimeter. Marines helped elderly civilians navigate through packed evacuation routes. Corpsmen treated children suffering from dehydration and exhaustion while simultaneously caring for wounded service members. Junior leaders made critical decisions under extraordinary pressure, often relying on training and instinct rather than detailed guidance. Every member of the unit contributed to keeping the mission moving forward. The operation demanded long hours with little opportunity for rest. Many personnel remained on duty for extended periods while managing security, humanitarian assistance, and logistical coordination at the same time. Even as fatigue accumulated, the focus remained on protecting lives and maintaining order under exceptionally difficult circumstances. Although the bombing at Abbey Gate became the event most people remember, it represented only one part of a much larger mission. Before that attack, thousands of civilians had already passed safely through the evacuation process. Families who believed they had no remaining path to freedom were able to board aircraft and begin new lives because coalition service members continued carrying out their responsibilities despite mounting risks. The actions of Ghost Company reflected years of training and preparation. Their response demonstrated the importance of disciplined leadership, teamwork, and trust within small units. Individual Marines repeatedly placed the mission and the safety of others ahead of their own comfort, and in many cases, ahead of their own personal safety. The loss of 13 United States service members deeply affected the entire military community. Their sacrifice became a solemn reminder of the dangers that accompany humanitarian operations conducted in unstable environments. Their memory continues to be honored by the Marines, sailors, soldiers, airmen, guardians, and families who served alongside them, and by those who continue serving today. For the members of Ghost Company, the experience did not end when they departed Afghanistan. The lessons learned during those days continue to influence how they think about leadership, responsibility, and service. Many have spoken about the lasting bond created through shared hardship and the enduring obligation they feel to remember those who never returned home. History often records operations through statistics, timelines, and official reports. Those records are important, but they cannot fully capture the character displayed by the people who carried out the mission. Behind every evacuation flight, every checkpoint, and every security position were individuals making difficult decisions, supporting one another, and working to protect as many lives as possible under extraordinary circumstances. The story of Ghost Company is ultimately one of service. It is a story of Marines, sailors, and soldiers who accepted difficult responsibilities, adapted to rapidly changing conditions, and continued moving forward despite uncertainty and loss. Their professionalism, resilience, and commitment to one another remain the lasting legacy of their mission during the final days of the evacuation from Kabul.